Revolutionary greetings, comrades. Few days ago, we recorded a video titled Coups in Africa. We were looking into West and Central Africa, also looking into the involvement of France in those coups. We said in the last 18 months there have been a number of coups in Central and West Africa. Comrades have been writing, and we appreciate the comments that you keep on writing. One comrade based in the United Kingdom wrote this to me. I quote, "Comrade Mabena, I'm fascinated by the way you elaborate on the French and the conditionalities they imposed on its former West African colonies. But it will also be interesting to know why African leaders were so eager to accept these conditionalities. What is it that can make us understand what made something that seems weird to us so understandable to them? My fear is that you may have heard the one side of the story and not the other," close quote. This is one of the reasons that we have decided to continue discussing French involvement in Africa, particularly its former colonies. We will, in the next few days, in different videos, of course, study key players in the struggle in the former colonies of France, in the struggle for national liberation. What was their attitude to the French question and to the entire liberation of Africa? We are going to split this into three. We will, in this video, look into briefly Leopold Senghor of Senegal. The next video, we are going to look into Leopold Bonji of Ivory Coast or Cote d'Ivoire. Then the last key character that we are going to study is Ahmed Sekou Toure of Guinea. Of course, I might not be pronouncing the names correctly. These are French names. We think that if we are going to do one video in starting all these letters, the video might be too long. So we think it's important that we split. We start in this video, we only concentrate on Senghor, and then in the rest we also split. What is important that we should note is that Senghor was born in 1906 in Senegal into a prosperous Serere trading family. He had been taught by Catholic missionaries in Senegal to scorn his ancestral culture as worthless and to look solely to France for enlightenment. This is, is what he understood at an early age, that he had to scorn his own culture, his own tradition, African tradition, and look to France for enlightenment. And this defined him as a political leader until Senegal gained independence. But of course, not taking away from Leopold Senghor is that he was an intelligent young man at the time. He won a government scholarship to go and study in France. He left Senegal at the age of 21. He spent about 7 years studying. He wrote a number of publications for literature. So he was intelligent. But of course, when he was in France, he began, of course, to develop this black consciousness. He actually led the black consciousness, and this is what he had to say at the time. But when he was leading this black consciousness, he wanted to remain a black French. He did not want to divorce his political philosophy from what we might term French Empire. Let's get what he said. I quote, "With docility, we accepted the values of the West, its discursive reason, and its techniques. Our ambition was to become photographic negatives of the colonizers, black-skinned Frenchmen. It went even further, for we would have blushed, if we could have blushed, about our black skin, our frizzled hair, our flat noses, above all, for the values of our traditional civilization. Our people secretly caused us shame," close quote. He said these words in 1961. What is drawing my attention is that they wanted to be black Frenchmen. Let's also get what he continues. I quote, "We had been able to assimilate the French language and the mathematics, but we weren't able to slough off either black skin or our black soul. Thus, we were led in search of a passionate quest for a holy grail, our collective soul." It was at the time when he was saying these words that he was leading the black consciousness. You remember when we were discussing a narrow nationalism. So his was basically narrow nationalism, which he was leading because he wanted black men to be identified as French. He was, of course, because he studied in France, he spent years in France, he became a neutralized Frenchman. Because of that, he spent a year on compulsory military service. After serving in the military, he began his political career in 1945, where he was elected to represent Senegal in the Constituent Assembly. It is also important to note that former French colonies would elect black representatives to represent them in the Constituent Assembly. This Constituent Assembly was not in Africa, it was in Paris. So you will get elected from your African country, you go and spend time in Paris. Even when the winds of nationalism gathered momentum elsewhere in Africa, he remained staunchly loyal to the French cause. Remember, this is what he was taught as a kid when he was young, before he went to study in France, that you have to remain loyal to France, you have to look up to France for enlightenment. He differed with the political and economic views of Kwame Nkrumah. He thought Kwame Nkrumah's ideas were too radical, and he thought they were not acceptable in Senegal or in the rest of the French colonies. This we see when he advised Tunisia to keep close ties with the France. He, of course, also voted when he was in the Constituent Assembly, voted for war appropriations in Algeria, and approved this dispatch of Senegalese troops to fight the FLN. We will, of course, in the later video, discuss the Algerian Revolution, so that we understand why he also participated and voted for the dispatchment of troops of Senegal to go and fight the liberation military wing of Algeria, FLN. What is also important to note is what he said ahead of the 1955 conference of the non-aligned states on colonial independence. This was called the Bandung conference. It was held in 1955. He said, and I quote, "What I fear is that in the future, Under the fatal pressure of African liberation, we might be induced to leave the French orbit. We must stay not only in the French Union, but in the French Republic, close quote. This explains the attitude of France today in its former colonies. The foundation was laid by people like Leopold Senghor when they wanted to look to France for enlightenment. This is why today France trains and controls the military in its former colonies. This is why, as we explained in the previous video, France today controls the economies of its former colonies. But we will also see, when we discuss again Comrade Traoré, his attitude, because his was totally different, or opposed. He was opposed to the views of the likes of Leopold Senghor. We will also check and understand the attitude even of the Americans. Remember, the American president visited Guinea ahead of the elections. The 14 states were asked to vote either to be part of what is called the French Union or to gain their independence. And when the American president arrived, which we'll discuss in the next video, the people of Guinea were lining the streets and they made it very clear that they wanted independence. They actually showed the American president the middle finger, which the likes of Senghor thought that it was too radical. So Senghor advocated for, he did not advocate for independence, but he advocated for a political federation between France and Africa. This, of course, he actually laid the basis of what is happening. When we conclude, because we need then to ask this question, what does this mean in our struggle for imperialism? We defined as Zimbabwe Communist Party ours as a struggle against imperialism and the looting class. And France is controlling the 14 colonies. And we said in the previous video that yes, indeed, some military coups are progressive, but of course some military coups are wrong. And we will then have to analyze, as we tried to do in the first video, to say what is happening in Mali in rejecting French dominance. Remember, we said Mali has cut ties, political and economic ties with France. And we are of the view that it is progressive. So, comrades, let's continue to engage. Let's hear your views. But as I conclude, I have to stress this point, which defines the rest of the leadership of the former liberation movement in Africa, even in Zimbabwe. The people that led the liberation movements in the main were the elite, educated in missionary schools. Some, in the case of our country, wanted to be more English than the English themselves, just as Senghor wanted to be more French than the French themselves. But we see Comrade Traoré, as we'll discuss, of Guinea, whose background was from a trade union movement. And we get to understand, even in Zimbabwe, that the political leadership, that is the elite, that was educated by missionaries, sold out the struggle. And a number of progressive leaders who had a trade union background were murdered not by the enemy, but by their colleagues. So this is important to study as we, as the Zimbabwe Communist Party, say, completing the liberation of Zimbabwe. Comrades, please write your comments, like the video, circulate, and subscribe. Otherwise, have a great day. Amandla, comrades.